Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell. It is April 4th, 2013, the year beyond Thunderdome, and hopefully my video will work. I've had endless computer problems and still suffering with them. We're going to try and get through this news and views in relatively decent order. Now, today I have a few announcements, a couple of announcements, and then I want to get right to the news. The first announcement is this week, for those of you who don't know, the website passed 3 million hits in the last couple of years since the makeover, so I want to thank you all for your continued support, your comments, your interaction on the blogs, sending me research articles. It's been truly overwhelming. I'm very thankful to all of you for doing that, and I hope you'll continue your support because I truly appreciate it. Second thing is, a lot of you are still asking me what I'm working on now, what my plans are, general subject areas that I'm doing. So first of all, I am working on a sequel to Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. This is already up at Amazon. It's called Covert Wars and the Clash of Civilizations. I managed just yesterday to finally figure out how to start the book, which is always the most difficult aspect. I literally cogitate for some weeks before I figure out how I start the book. Once I do that, the rest of the book kind of organizes itself. So I managed to break that logjam yesterday and get some good progress. So hopefully I'll have this book done, I'd say maybe at the latest by the end of July. I'm planning and researching already a sequel to The Financial Vipers of Venice, which is in press with Feral House. It's already up, apparently, at Amazon. Some of you have told me about that. I am working on the sequel. This may turn out to be 2 books, depending on how I think the material should be organized, because I'm planning to bring it up to the modern period. And then finally, I'm researching, of course, some sequel to Yahweh, the Two-Faced God with Dr. DeHart. And then finally, I have another book that I want to come later in this series of books dealing with some issues that have been themes throughout all of my books, but I finally want to get around to addressing them. Now, that said brings us to the news, and the news is North Korea, and a lot of you, and I mean a lot of you, have sent me articles and asked me what I think has been going on in North Korea. Now, I don't have time because of the amount of material that I want to get out here to do anything more than direct your attention to the website version of this News and Views where I've listed the articles that I'm referring to. The first one is an article in Iranian Press TV, and you can see the headline there, Japan warns North Korea over provocations. And this I include because I've told the story about how a few years back, when North Korea was again rattling its saber and testing missiles by shooting them over Japan, late at night, and as you know, I work very late at night, oftentimes till 5 or 6 in the morning. I listen to talk radio as I'm working, and the story was run. It was either on ABC or Mutual News. I forget which of the 2 networks carried the story, and they only ran it once. And the story was that the Japanese foreign minister had warned North Korea against making any sort of nuclear threat against Japan because Japan could arm itself to the teeth with nuclear and thermonuclear weapons in a very short order, and would do so if threatened like this. Now, that was a very curious story because it was an indicator that Japan wasn't entirely confident being reliant upon the U.S. nuclear umbrella. And of course, Japan could easily arm itself with nuclear and thermonuclear weapons and do so very quickly. Now, the second article is this, and this is an article that ran in Reuters, the Rothschild outfit, and this is China's anger at North Korea overcomes worry over U.S. stealth flights. And I want to point out that in this article there's 2 interesting things that are referred to. The first is that the Chinese people themselves are blogging on their websites and Twitter accounts and so on that the regime in North Korea needs to make profound and substantive fundamental changes in its policy. And this, to me, is very interesting that the Chinese government is allowing this criticism to occur at all, because it's a subtle way of the Chinese government being able to send a message to North Korea without having to send the message. It's allowing its people to send that message. But the other thing that this article points out is that as far as the Chinese military and leadership is concerned, the American and South Korean joint military exercises with the B-2s and so on and so forth is all a calculated game and part of the encirclement strategy that the United States has been trying to pursue in the Western Pacific Rim, all right, against China. That's the way it's being perceived by the Chinese leadership. In other words, North Korea itself isn't the problem. North Korea is absolutely no threat to the United States, and with American missile defense ships, with the next article here, South Korea warns of fast response to North and U.S. positions in Aegis-class guided missile frigate, which of course is capable of missile defense. So in other words, North Korea is really no threat to South Korea. The United States and South Korea could easily crush, in my opinion, any North Korean aggression. So it's really not about any threat from North Korea. This is part of a wider geopolitical theater that's playing out in the Pacific Rim. Now, this brings me, before I get to my final article, this brings me to my own personal take on what I think may be going on here, and I stress may, because again, you know, I'm no insider. I'm not privy to the meetings of geopoliticians and military leaders and so on and so forth, so I'm guessing here. But what my guess is you have to put China's attitude here into the context of the wider context of the emergence of the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then now, more recently, I've been calling them the BRICS nations because of the addition of South Africa to this emerging coalition of Asian and African and South American powers. Now, if you're the BRICS nations, I've been arguing that one reason this bloc emerged is that these nations are fed up, number one, with the galloping American imperialism, with the creation of false flag events to inject American power into regions of the world and deny access to resources to those nations to allow the West to continue to exploit them. This is really the old geopolitical game of the British Empire, previous to that with the French as well, the Dutch, and now the United States is continuing in that oceanic maritime version of imperialism. And the BRICS nations, to a certain extent, are a response to that. They are attempting to create a military geopolitical counterweight to American power, to Western power. But the other thing that the BRICS nations are a response to is the growing worldwide discontent with the obvious criminality, fraud, and corruption on the part of the Western financial oligarchs. This, I think, is the biggest part of the story. And you've seen the response in Cyprus. The Cypriot people are justifiably fed up with the fact that their money is literally being stolen from them to satisfy some bureaucratic program of austerity emanating from Berlin and Brussels to keep the European Union, this hydra, alive. All right, and I've indicated elsewhere why I think Germany's game here may be a little duplicitous anyway, but we won't get into that here. For the BRICS nations, the presence of North Korea, a neo-Stalinist regime. It isn't really neo-Stalinist, it's Stalinist. It's an unreconstructed Stalinist regime that goes all the way back to the very earliest days of the Cold War. And other than Cuba, it might be perceived as the last of these hardline communist Stalinist type of regimes. Even communist China is telling North Korea that, you know, your brand of it is just way behind the times, and it looks bad. In other words, the BRICS nations may be putting pressure on China and looking at North Korea and saying, the presence of this nation as your ally damages our case to the rest of the world. So in other words, there may be, and I think there probably is, tremendous behind-the-scenes pressure not only from Moscow, but from Beijing on Pyongyang to reform its ways. And I suggest to you that, theater notwithstanding, there is probably also a great deal of backroom, secret, high-level diplomatic negotiations between Russia and China, the United States, Australia, and Great Britain, as well as South Korea and Japan, to figure out ways to put enough pressure on the regime in North Korea either to have it removed or to initiate on its own accord genuine, real, substantial, fundamental reform. But sooner or later, rest assured, either the West is going to get rid of that regime or the BRICS nations, in the form of Chinese intervention, may get rid of that regime. This is really what I think is going on here. Now, why am I putting it in such a large geopolitical context? Because there has been another huge development, one that I don't think got much coverage in the major American media. I don't know, because I don't watch it. I just don't trust it anymore because of long associations it's had with American intelligence, with the corporations, with the American financial oligarchy. In other words, what you hear on it is the same old, same old. All right. This story has a headline that says it all and that explains what may be going on behind the scenes. I'll hold it up. Australia to bypass US dollar, convert directly into Chinese yuan. All right. There is talk in Australia, between Australia and China, about allowing this direct convertibility. Now, folks, this is huge. Australia has been one of the United States' staunchest allies in the Pacific. It was an ally during World War II, and besides the British and the United States, the nationalist Chinese, the Australians had significant troops in that theater of the war. Australia was an ally with the United States during the Korean War. It had ground troops on the ground in South Korea. And it was the only ally of the United States during the Vietnam War that actually had combat troops stationed in Vietnam. So in other words, Australia has a long history of alliance and friendship with the United States, and additionally, it has economic ties with the United States, obviously, and for that matter, obviously with the British Commonwealth. So for there to be talks about direct convertibility, this is yet again a huge signal that the reserve status of the United States dollar is tumbling. And I've said so many times before that the backup now of the United States dollar is the American military. All right? And this means that America is a dangerous power, particularly in volatile regions. So it's a delicate situation, not so much because of what North Korea is saying. It's a delicate situation because of the wider context of what's going on in the world. There is a clash geopolitically and economically in the Pacific Rim. And mark my words, I've said this before, when allies bolt economically, militarily, they are going to bolt soon thereafter. All right. So this is a real problem, and this, I think, is the reason the United States has been putting bases and stationing troops in Australia. All right. So in other words, the response to an economic situation, America doesn't have the economic goodwill anymore that it used to have, and so now the response is military. And the response by the Chinese, you'll notice, has been very, very subtle, and it's been very soft, and that is economic. So we're seeing a geopolitical conflict here, folks. The Chinese, I think, are going to play the long-term game that they've been playing since really before World War II. And that long-term game, they're content to wait. All right? There's an old saying, the United States thinks in terms of years or decades. The British and Europeans think in terms of centuries, and the Chinese think in terms of millennia. In other words, they're very slow, they're very patient, they're very deliberate. So I think the Chinese are going to content themselves with playing the long-term game. It's the West that has to play the short-term game because their time is running out. People are increasingly calling the financial oligarchs in London and New York's bluff, and this is the geopolitical game that's going on. I don't personally foresee any real conflict on the Korean Peninsula because everyone knows if one starts, it could get out of hand. So you're going to see everybody trying to avoid that while simultaneously trying to figure out a way to put maximum pressure on the regime in North Korea. It's going to be very interesting to watch how this one plays out because the countries now that you're going to have to really watch are Japan, United States, Australia, China, and Russia. If they all start sending the same message, and curiously right now they're all sending the same message to North Korea, then it's really going to be interesting to see how it's play out. I don't think you're going to see the Chinese allow a Western military intervention unilaterally. That's the key. So anyway, that's my take on events right now, folks, from the Nefarium. This is Joseph P. Farrell. Thanks for signing in, everybody. God bless, and we'll see you on the flip side.